Does anyone want to take a trip with me? To Senator Wiener's office, that is. Well, as you can see, we're here in San Francisco, City Hall, an iconic place where people get married. That's not why we're here today. We're here to talk about psychedelic decrim with Senator Scott Wiener. But honestly, marriage is kind of what got me to this path. I had a spontaneous love marriage after a trip because I just didn't know shit about psychedelics, y'all. And I want y'all to know some stuff, so let's get into this conversation. The psychedelics are still criminalized right now, so I did make sure to check my pockets, make sure to check my bag so we can still have this conversation, if you know what I mean. And we're good to go. All right, y'all, I am super excited to be here with Senator Scott Wiener. We're talking to stewards around the nation on psychedelic decriminalization and how they're working to end the war against communities and culture, AKA the war against drugs. When I was thinking, what would a senator who focuses on psychedelic decrim's office look like? You did not disappoint. We got this in the background. Before we get into this conversation, could you just tell me a little bit about the pictures that you have here? Because I heard that there's some history to it.
I have an amazing person in the arts world, and he helps us organize community art showings. The recent show we did is transgender artists and trans-themed art. And so it's an amazing opportunity for local artists to show their talent, and we love having the artwork up in the office.
We're going to be talking about psychedelic decrim in California. I know that you just recently reintroduced SB 58. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, we first started with SB 519 for 2 years, and I wasn't sure how far it was going to get, but by the skin of our teeth, we kept passing different milestones, and it passed the state Senate, and it got almost to the end of the road in the state assembly, but then the bill got messed up in its last committee, so we had to abandon it. But we felt pretty good about the progress we had made in terms of educating members of the legislature who may not have thought very much in the past about psychedelics, having particularly our veterans talk to members of the legislature, and they're extremely persuasive. And I think we elevated the issue. So it was disappointing that the bill did not work out the first time around, but we got right back up and reintroduced it as Senate Bill 58, and we're going to keep fighting to pass it.
Right, I know people say third luck's a charm, but I feel like we just need the second one to get that momentum. And I feel like, to your point, with already having discussions and educating folks on psychedelic decriminalization, why it matters and why it's important, there's already some momentum that's picked up. So are you more hopeful with this one passing than the previous?
I am. We have a lot of new members of the legislature. There was big turnover this year for a variety of reasons, and I think a lot of open-minded people will have a lot of work to do to provide information to people and make the case. But, Oregon voters and now Colorado voters, and there's just is growing momentum. And there's also been a lot of publicity about the benefits of psychedelics and the really increasing scientific evidence. What's tough is that because we have some real drug addiction challenges around opioids and meth, people see that and they sometimes generalize to all drugs. And what we try to say is, well, first of all, the war on drugs in general doesn't work. It doesn't work to arrest people for drug use. But psychedelics in particular, these drugs are not addictive. They're not causing problems, and they're helping a lot of people. And so we shouldn't be arresting people for possessing them and using them.
I 100% agree. And I'm really curious to know, because I haven't gone into the nuances of SB 58 yet, but I have heard that there's a little bit of some differences between 519 and 58. Could you unpack that?
Yeah, so the structure of the bill is basically the same. It's just getting rid of the criminalization of possession and use and allowing also sharing. And so it applies to people 21 and older. So it's generally the same structure. But in SB 519, it was a broader array of psychedelics. We started with almost everything. Ketamine came out early because for whatever reason, people were freaked out by ketamine. It gets tarred as a date rape drug, which it is not any more than any other substance can be used to abuse someone. So we removed that early. This version is focused on plant-based and mushroom-based psychedelics as opposed to synthetics. So LSD and MDMA are no longer in the bill. I would love for them to be in the bill, and hopefully one day. But what we found was that the plant-based, mushroom-based are are going to be smoother in moving it along. And our view was, let's get it passed in covering mushrooms and DMT and ayahuasca and mescaline and ibogaine. That would be very, very impactful. So let's do that, and then we can come back to the synthetics later.
Right, and mescaline not derived from peyote, right?
Not mescaline except for derived from peyote, exactly.
Perfect. Okay, so what are some lessons that you've learned on your own journey? I feel like as we talk about psychedelics, even to go through the process of policy, that's a whole ceremony in itself.
Yeah.
So from SB 519 to 58, what are some lessons that you've learned from this?
Yeah, I mean, what I've learned is that what is powerful and persuasive to policymakers is when they hear about real people's experience. And that's why we work really hard to get our veterans and also parents who've had kids who have struggled with issues that psychedelics have helped. Getting them in front of the legislators is incredibly powerful, and it dispels some of the stereotypes that people have. People have certain perceptions that are either incomplete or not accurate, and so having that real life testimony from people makes a huge difference. And also just really putting the science in front of people. It's also very, very compelling. Now, some of my colleagues will say, well, let's just limit it only to medical use. And then we have to, explain why. Yes, of course we want it for medical use, but it goes beyond medical use, and we don't want to medicalize everything. And there are people who have huge benefits from psychedelic experiences, even though it's not with a medical professional. But we do want people to be able to use safely. And that means bringing it into the sunlight and making it easy for people to get information.
Yeah, and I think that's really critical on that medical piece, and having it not just be that's where it ends, because for many people, especially from folks like my community, Black and brown folks, we often don't seek medical treatment or traditional forms of healthcare because we have our own aversions or traumas to it. So having it be more expansive even for access. I know that a lot of people have been talking, if we go straight through a medical route, it becomes inaccessible to folks, whether through lack of insurance or just the cost. So what are you thinking when it comes to accessibility to these medicines?
What we're doing now is step one. Just saying, let's just stop arresting people and prosecuting people for possessing and using the drug. So that's, to me, like the first foundational thing to do. And then as we build on that, we want to avoid the mistakes that we made with cannabis, where everything became very expensive and corporatized. And so that's why it's like one step at a time. Let's decriminalize it. At some point, it would be great to legalize it. Keeping in mind all the lessons we learned from cannabis, because we're already seeing a lot of people who are trying to make money off of psychedelics. I don't begrudge anyone, making money and starting a business, but we want to be sure that people who have been engaged in the psychedelic world for decades and have helped build this movement, we want to make sure that they're not shoved to the side so that the big corporations can come in. So that's important. We also a lot of people may think that they can benefit from psychedelics, but they don't know what to do. And so we want them to have good information, but we know there's already a whole network of like underground psychedelic therapists who do amazing work and help people to have a good experience and a safe experience. I think it might make sense for us to explore having like a certification for psychedelic therapists so that people know, okay, this is a reputable person. This is someone who I, can help educate me and help me have a good experience. So there are a number of different things we want to explore, and they're all very complicated, and we want to make sure we're not excluding anyone by adopting different kinds of laws or regulations. But step number one is decriminalization.
I feel like on that note, it's really important for folks to have a distinction between deprioritization, decriminalization, and even federal laws. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's been a very interesting journey where I see sponsored ads on Instagram, for example, of an ayahuasca ceremony in Oakland or San Francisco. And one of the reasons why these types of conversations are important as we start to normalize conversation around it, I think people begin to loosen up, in terms of how they're promoting their offerings. This is an underground movement, but people are still subject to arrest. So can you just kind of like...
Yeah, and that's actually a really important point, because sometimes people will say to me, "Oh, you don't need your bill. San Francisco, Santa Cruz, Oakland, they've already legalized or they've already decriminalized psychedelics." And I say, no, they haven't. They don't have the power to do that. Only the state can decriminalize by changing the penal code. What these cities have done, which I support, is, as you know, to deprioritize. So they basically passed, in effect, a resolution sort of asking their local law enforcement not to prioritize this enforcement. It's not eliminating the potential for enforcement. A police officer can still enforce and arrest, and certainly other law enforcement agencies can come in and do that, and there can be other consequences of criminalization beyond arrest. And so people need to understand that these local deprioritization ordinances are great, and I support them, but they are limited in their impact, and how we really get to it is the decriminalization at the state level, and then ultimately federal action to reschedule these substances and to stop federal enforcement.
Quick PSA, y'all, before you start promoting that next mushroom ceremony, get into policy, understand a little bit about how you could be harming yourself or even the communities that you're trying to get activated and help heal. And so I really appreciate that. And one of the communities that you're working with, as you mentioned, are veterans.
Yeah, I mean, the veterans are just amazing. I mean, these are people who, they went to war for our country, and they fought for our country, and they sacrificed and put their lives at risk. And some of them, one of the people we work with is a triple amputee. And then they come back, and as often happens, generation after generation, veterans come back and they're treated very poorly, and they're not given the support and resources they need. And these veterans, they came back with PTSD and other mental health challenges, and traditional medicine wasn't working for them. And so they wanted to try psychedelic therapy, which was illegal here, so they would have to, so Heroic Hearts would help get them to Mexico or Peru to get therapy, and the therapy turned their lives around, completely turned their lives around. And we're basically saying, you veterans, to get your medicine, to get your treatment, you're a criminal if you do it here, so you have to fly to another country. And so for anyone who doesn't have access to the ability to fly to another country, or can't take that amount of time, or whatever, like, it's just bad, and they should be able to get that treatment here. And so Heroic Hearts has just been extraordinary in just, again, meeting with legislators, talking to the press, dispelling a lot of stereotypes about psychedelics that people hold from 50 years ago, and they're just incredibly compelling. I just still remember I had one colleague, a senator, who she early on told me she's totally not supportive of the bill, she's not going to support it. And then the veterans were able to get a meeting with her, they met with her, and then she came up to me, she said, "I'm supporting your bill," and then she spoke for it when we had our floor debate on it. So they're very, very persuasive.
That's beautiful. And yeah, I think having those personal conversations, it only helps to dispel these myths that people have on quote-unquote drug users and people who are tapping into different types of healing. I like to call all psychedelics, medicines, across the board, a medicine of some sort, and people are using that to cope with whatever trauma that they may be experiencing. And being able to have those conversations could start not only normalize, but destigmatize communities. And I really love what you said when you did your press release on SB 58, that we need to end the outdated racist failed war on drugs and finally pursue drug policies that help people instead of incarcerating them. And I love that you did add, this context, how you want to focus on decriminalizing all psychedelics and beyond, decriminalizing all drugs, because I recently very blessed to interview Dr. Carl Hart, author of Drug Use for Grown-Ups, and he really emphasized how there's, many different medicines that people work with are a psychedelic of some sort. It changes us, it alters us in some way, and we use it to heal or cope in some way. And so I would love for you to share, just for the people who are impacted by, say, being criminalized for methamphetamines, for opioids, what are ways that we could support them even if this decrim bill or decrim bills across the nation aren't necessarily including those in the policy?
Yeah, I mean, I think for people who are using opioids or meth, we want them to be healthy. And first of all, we want them not to die. And that's why I authored the vetoed bill to authorize safe consumption sites. We want people to be able to use safely. And I have friends who were meth users, and I very much wanted them to, my hope was that they would stop using meth because I saw the problems that it was causing for them. But the way you get people to that point where they're maybe using less or stopping entirely is not to arrest them or to keep them in fear. It's to work with them, to provide them treatment if they're ready for it, to help them be healthy and not die when they get there, because you can't go into recovery or treatment if you're dead. And so to me, it's about treating drug use as a health issue, and it might be a health issue that's really positive, like psychedelic therapy, or a health issue where you're addicted to opioids or meth and you need support and treatment to try to get healthy again. And so that's really what's so horrible about the war on drugs is it moves past all of that. And it's all about punishing people for a health issue, and that just doesn't work.
Right, and continues to traumatize them. And so even when they're released, the trauma that they experience while being incarcerated, they're going to find a way to continue to cope. So it's like this cycle that never ends. And on that note, we got to give you flowers where flowers are due. In your tenure, you've had 65 bills signed into law, 15 alone in 2022. I need to name a few of them. SB 467, ending wrongful convictions. We have SB 836, protecting immigrants in court. SB 225, improving mental health care access. SB 107, trans state of refuge. SB 1186, medical access. SB 1106, Fresh Start Act, which is super important, which helps people clear their criminal records. So, yes, you are known as the drug decrim senator, but again, many of these things that we're talking about, these are ways that Black, Brown, Indigenous communities continue to be policed for, and you have done a lot of work.
No, I appreciate that, and I really, to me, the most rewarding part of public service is when you pass a law or do something that tangibly makes someone's life better. And thank you for mentioning the Fresh Start Act, SB 1106, which we had a situation where people would owe restitution as part of their conviction. They're poor, they get out of prison, they have no money, so they're never going to be able to pay it, and it can't be discharged in bankruptcy. And that would be used to block them from clearing their record, which would then be a barrier to working and make it even harder to pay their restitution. And so that bill went into effect January 1st, and we just learned that the San Francisco Public Defender's Office has identified over 1,000 people just in San Francisco who will be able to benefit from that and get their records cleared and move on with their life. So that was a fantastic one. We had an awesome coalition of advocates behind it.
That's amazing. Yeah. I know in Colorado, with Natural Medicine Healthcare Act, there was a lot of discussion on not including expungement. So I think having ways to support those who have been formerly or currently incarcerated on the war against drug is super critical. And so again, just thank you for including that in your work.
Absolutely.
Speaking of reintroductions, I would like to circle back with SB 57. I saw the Dr. Phil video that you did, major clap back. I know we got to include that clip, Tony.
This arena for 45 years, and my position has been you never surrender to the disease. You never surrender to the disease. You never say...
Letting people die on the streets is surrendering to the disease.
Are we going to see a reintroduction of some sort of, SB 57, or could you explain a little bit for folks who aren't familiar what SB 57 is and what is going to happen in the future?
Yeah, SB 57 is would have had it been signed, would have authorized San Francisco, Oakland, and Los Angeles to implement what we call safe consumption sites, which are sites where people who are using drugs, instead of using it on the sidewalk or in a park, can go inside in a safe, clean, healthy setting with healthcare professionals there. They can make sure they have clean needles, that they are, they'll be able to test their drugs, maybe use a fentanyl testing strip so they know exactly what they're ingesting. And then if they do overdose, having someone right there with Narcan who can immediately reverse it. These sites have been in operation around the world, in Europe. One was opened in Ukraine a few years ago, so Ukraine's ahead of the US. In Europe, in Australia, and Canada for like 30 plus years, not a single person has ever died of an overdose in one of these sites. They, about half of the people end up going into treatment and recovery. It reduces emergency room trips, it reduces HIV and hepatitis infections, and it's just like a good thing. And so we wanted to be able to pilot them in California, and San Francisco in particular was ready to go. We fought really hard over years. We finally got it on the Governor Newsom's desk, and sadly he vetoed it. He's, in general, been very, very good on drug policy and good on harm reduction and just rock solid on a lot of these issues. So we were, obviously very disappointed with the veto. If I would reintroduce it in a heartbeat if the governor either were to have a different perspective or if there were certain changes they wanted. We'd be happy to work with the governor on there. But unless the governor communicates a change of heart, there's no point in me reintroducing it because it would just be the same results.
And do you think that if he's not going to reintroduce that, what makes you a little bit more confident that he would welcome a psychedelic decrim bill?
We don't know. He's never expressed an opinion on it. Obviously, if they told us that he was definitely going to veto it, which they have not said, we would have to evaluate that. But like I said, the Governor Newsom has generally been really progressive on criminal justice issues, on drug policy issues, and so I view the veto of the Safe Consumption Site bill as sort of an anomaly for him. So I think he'll be open-minded about it. I think he is a thoughtful person. I've known him for a very long time, and so I think we have a path with the governor. But we'll do what we've done with all the members of the legislature. We'll make sure, hopefully the veterans will be able to meet with him. We'll just our job is to make the case to him why he should sign it. But we have to get it on his desk first, and that's not guaranteed. Right. So.
And I just want to acknowledge again just that Dr. Phil clip where they came at you hard, and I really loved your response where when they basically said that you're enabling people to use, and you're like, I'm focused on keeping people alive.
Yeah, and Dr. Phil clearly has a different perspective than I did, but I do appreciate he gave me plenty of space to talk about it. The person who was against us, this guy Michael Schellenberger, he's sort of a scam artist who has just put out a lot of misinformation. He's now aligned with Elon Musk, but he's very damaging because he has a huge following on Twitter, and so he puts out a lot of really bombastic stuff about drug use and sort of supporting the war on drugs, which is unfortunate.
I really see how this conversation of psychedelic exceptionalism and spiritual bypassing, even in this, medicine community, encroaches itself into how we discuss psychedelic decrim. I do a lot of work with Black, Brown, Native communities, and when I do a post or when I talk about the correlation between anti-Blackness and psychedelics, a lot of the response I get is, keep racism out of this. The mushrooms see no color, this is divisive. A lot of that language has encroached itself into the spiritual movement, to your point where I think you said like there's a level of desperation and people are feeling hopeless these days. How do we get people to understand how connected the political is to our spiritual practices, how important it is for us to understand why this is necessary to have conversation layered around not just the medicines that we use, but the communities who are most impacted by it?
I mean, I think we have to acknowledge, because sometimes people say to me, like, oh, why do we need to decriminalize psychedelics? Is anyone really getting arrested for it? And I said, well, people who look like me are, by and large, not very much getting arrested for it. I said, but there are communities that are being continually targeted, and we know that with the drug laws, it's never been equitable in terms of who's targeted, and it's been Black and Brown communities. Absolutely, and we still see it today. There's still a disparity. The sentences for crack are still higher than for cocaine. Not as distorted as it was before, but it's still harsher, and it just blows my mind that that's still federal law, and so the war on drugs has always been a tool of mass incarceration for Black and Brown communities, and so I think it's really important for those of us who are white to acknowledge that and understand it and know that drug user experience is often very different depending on who you are and what community you're from, and we need to remind people of that. And it is easy for people to start forgetting that or say, let's not talk about that. We should talk about it, because you can't talk about drug policy without talking about race.
I 100% agree. Snap, snap, snap. Prince Harry recently came out of the psychedelic drug closet. Would love for you to share, if you're comfortable, what is your relationship to psychedelics?
Well, I prefer not to talk about my own stuff because I don't want to make it about me. But I think psychedelics are pretty prevalent in San Francisco, and people are very, I think, comfortable with them. And I have to say, like, sometimes when I'm out, like at nightclubs or whatever, with people who might have previously used other drugs at the clubs, they're now a lot of times using mushrooms, and I sort of love that because I feel like they're safer in a way with it, and it just works out really well for people. So I love being in a city that has embraced psychedelics like San Francisco has.
Well, Senator, thank you. I look forward to seeing how SB 58 evolves, and I appreciate all of the work that you're doing in San Francisco and beyond.
Thank you so much.
That was good, right?